This is not about charity. This is about power. In Burkina Faso, rain has become politics, and every drop is a weapon. The West calls him reckless. His people call him stubborn. But one fact cannot be ignored. He is rewriting the rules of survival. In August 2025, the unthinkable happened. President Ibrahim Traoré ordered millions of gallons of purified water buried beneath the sand, while villages dug with bare hands for a muddy sip. While cattle collapsed on dry riverbeds, salvation was hidden underground. Outsiders called it madness. The desperate called it cruelty. But for Traoré, it was doctrine. Burkina Faso is one of the driest nations on earth, to recording less than 700 millimeters of rain last year, its lowest in a decade. In the north, entier village emptied. In the capital, wells coughed dust. Black markets sold water at the price of grain. This is not just drought, it is collapse in slow motion. And yet, against this despair, Traoré drew a line. Water will no longer be charity controlled by outsiders. It will be sovereignty, protected like uranium or oil. Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and join us for an Africa that no longer bows its head. In Burkina Faso, the sky no longer keeps its promises. The rains arrive late, thin, and vanish too soon. In 2025, the nation recorded less than 740 millimeters of rainfall, its lowest in 10 years. Some provinces, like Udalan and Tapoa, barely reached 500 millimeters, well below survival thresholds. The numbers may sound like statistics on a page, but to the people, they are death sentences written in dust. In the north, women wake before dawn and walk 20 kilometers just to fetch a bucket of brown water. Children abandon school to join the search. In the south, cattle collapse along dreed riverbeds, their bones piercing through hide as if the land itself is shedding its last strength. On the outskirts of Ouagadougou, mothers scrape rainwater from corrugated metal roofs and boil it, praying it does not poison their children. And still, the heat grows heavier. Every season feels hotter than the last. Every riverbed emptier. This is not simply drought. It is a slow collapse. The United Nations has already declared the Sahel one of the most climate-vulnerable regions in the world. But for Burkina farmers, that is not a headline. It is breakfast. No water means no food. No food means no future. Entire communities are vanishing. Between 2018 and 2024, more than 1,600,000 people were displaced. Some fled violence, but many fled thirst. The dry corridor between Kaya and Fada is now lined with abandoned villages. Fields have withered, roofs have caved in, and silence hangs where children once played. Urban centers are not spared. Ouagadougou's water treatment plants operate at 30% below demand. The capital's population has nearly doubled in 15 years. Yet its infrastructure remains frozen in time. Taps cough, pumps stall, and rationing has become routine. In markets, water sells in black stalls like contraband, more precious than oil. Frustration grows. Anger simmers. When a bucket of water costs more than a bag of maize, survival itself turns into a war. Burkina Faso was once self-sufficient in food staples. Today, it depends on grain imports from Ghana, Benin, and farther afield. This dependence is not only economic, it is geopolitical weakness. President Ibrahim Traoré has warned repeatedly that if the rains continue to fail, the country risks becoming a permanent humanitarian zone, ruled by aid trucks and foreign contracts. That is the nightmare he calls the silent genocide of climate neglect. Inside government halls, another phrase circulates: hydroexodus. Not a migration caused by warlords or bombs, but by thirst. Millions driven from their homes, not by borders drawn in politics, but by the slow betrayal of the clouds. This word carries weight heavier than policy. It captures the deepest fear of a nation, that its people will scatter, not because they want to, but because the earth leaves them no choice. Each day, Burkina families live this reality. A missed rain season can starve a region. A single spill of waste can poison a harvest. When every well becomes a front line, villagers fight neighbors. Farmers resist corporations. and despair itself becomes an enemy. The crisis is everywhere and nowhere, visible in cracked soil and silent in empty plates. Against this backdrop, one question looms like the merciless sun. How long can a nation survive when its lifeline is vanishing grain by grain? And who will dare to declare that water is no longer a blessing to beg for, but a right to defend? The order was clear and strange. Bury it. Not oil, not gold, not weapons water. Millions of gallons of desalinated, purified water were pumped into barrels and sealed beneath dunes in northern Burkina Faso. To the world, it looked like sabotage. Why hide what the people needed most? But to President Ibrahim Traoré, this was not madness. It was doctrine, a radical answer to a brutal truth. In Burkina Faso, water is never safe in the open. Open reservoirs evaporate under a sun that grows hotter every year. Exposed lakes become targets for theft, sabotage, or political control. Foreign contractors arrive with glossy proposals, always tied to loans and debts. Traoré saw the trap. So he defied the colonial logic and issued Directive 44B, a classified sovereign water policy written not in ink, but in brine. He ordered the creation of silent reservoirs, subsurface hydration bunkers, hidden beneath treated sand, wrapped in triple-layer membranes, monitored by AI systems designed in Ouagadougou, powered by solar microgrids, invisible to satellites, untouchable by foreign agencies. International observers called it reckless, a waste of scarce resources, declared reports from Brussels, a political stunt, muttered analysts in Geneva. But Traoré did not blink. He looked at his cabinet and declared, "Water is not charity, it is sovereignty. No fonds, no un blueprint. No French contractors, only Burkina engineers, under 30, trained in Accra and Addis Ababa, committed to one principle: that the nation would not beg for life from those who profit from its suffering." This underground network was more than engineering. It was a shield. Every buried tank was a declaration of independence. Every sealed valve was a refusal to kneel. In a region where less than 600 millimeters of rain fall each year, and where evaporation has increased by more than 16% in a decade, Traoré's logic was cold and sharp. Keep water in the ground, where the sun cannot steal it. Critics mocked the secrecy. But secrecy was the point. If enemies cannot see your reserves, they cannot weaponize them. If donors cannot measure your scarcity, they cannot dictate your survival. And so the silent reservoir became not only a technical project but a political line in the sand. For villagers who walked miles for muddy water, the idea felt cruel. Why hide salvation when children cried for it? But Traoré answered not with speech, but with pumps and pipelines. He spoke through construction sites and solar grids. To him, every barrel buried was a promise. The nation would not starve tomorrow simply because it drank today. Foreign capitals dismissed it as paranoia. Yet Traoré saw the future. They refused to name. Water wars are coming. Rivers will be fought over like oil fields. Crops will collapse. Cities will choke. And nations that stored water, not money, will be the ones that endure. In that future, Burkina Faso would not be a beggar at the table. It would be a guardian of its own wells. This is why the project carried weight beyond survival. It challenged the global water narrative that Africa must always depend on aid, on imports, on mercy. Traoré broke that script. By burying water, he declared that Burkina Faso would prepare in silence, rather than collapse in public. And so, under the merciless sky of the Sahel, while children searched for drops in the dust, beneath their feet lay an invisible arsenal, not of bombs, but of life, not to be spent recklessly, but to be guarded as the foundation of freedom. In the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this was not engineering, it was war. The strategy sounded deceptively simple. Do not chase the river, catch the rain. In a nation where clouds come like thieves quick, violent, and gone, President Ibrahim Traoré refused to gamble on luck. Instead of waiting for foreign-financed megadams that take decades to complete and billions to maintain, he launched a different revolution. Hundreds of modest micro-dams, each one a scar on the land transformed into a promise under Program FST4. RSR, launched in 2023, Burkina Faso completed or restored more than 318 microdams in just 2 years. Most were small enough to fit within a single valley, yet powerful enough to reshape lives. Their purpose was clear: capture sudden floods before they wash away crops, hold the water long enough for the soil to drink, recharge aquifers that had been collapsing for decades. Engineers called it managed surface retention with vertical infiltration. Villagers called it survival. In Kudogo, a 60-year-old farmer named Saulimane watched his field return to life. For 5 years, he had harvested nothing but dust. Then, after the dam was finished in 2024, his millet sprouted taller than his shoulders. He told neighbors, "Before, I prayed for clouds. Now I pray the dam holds." In Yatenga, women's cooperatives planted tomatoes and onions in October months, once reserved for hunger. Their produce filled local markets, cutting prices and lifting families out of desperation. The numbers tell the story. According to the National Water Agency's July 2025 report, village yields in some provinces doubled within a single season. More than 100,000 people now rely on microdams for irrigation. Goat herders who once walked 30 kilometers for water troughs now find them a few steps away, and for the first time in decades, dry season farming is possible in dozens of communes. But beyond crops and cattle, the dams reshaped communities. Schools in dam-fed villages report higher attendance because children no longer spend entire days fetching water. Markets that once sold imported grain now sell surplus maize grown locally. In mosques, imams call the dams a blessing, not from the clouds, but from the courage of a government that refused to wait. Foreign observers dismissed these projects as too modest, too unprofitable for global investment. And that was exactly the point. There were no glossy IMF billboards, no French contractors in white SUVs, no ribbon cuttings for donors, only Burkina engineers, local laborers, and concrete poured by calloused hands. Each dam stood as a declaration. This water stays here. The symbolism mattered as much as the water. Every microdam was a line drawn in the sand, a refusal to let aid trucks dictate who may live and who must wait. For generations, the world told Africa to wait for clouds, for donors, for permission. But the sight of green fields sprouting in November silence declared something new. Burkina Faso would no longer bow. Elders in Ouahigouya speak of how their grandchildren once fled to the city, chasing water and wages. Now, some return to farm the fields their parents abandoned. "We thought the land had forgotten us," one elder said, "but the water reminded us we belong." This is why critics in Western capitals, who brand Captain Ibrahim, latest news as reckless, miss the truth. These dams are not about charity. They are about sovereignty. Every wall of stone, every pool of rain held back from the desert is a refusal to surrender. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. Because each drop caught in these basins is not just hydration, it is defiance. Each green stalk rising from the soil is not just food, it is dignity. Microdams do not just save Burkina Faso from drought, they save it from dependence. And in doing so, they whisper a new destiny. Africa does not need to beg for rain. It can build its own. Beneath the sandstone crust of Burkina Faso, deeper than any river, older than any map, lies a secret inheritance. It is not oil, not gas, but fossil water ancient reserves formed between 10,000 and 40,000 years ago, sealed since the last ice age, untouched, unrenewable. A finite legacy buried beneath the northern plateau stretching from Drought to the fringes of Djibo for decades. It was rumor. Miners whispered of hidden lakes beneath the desert. Villagers told legends of bottomless wells. In 2024, government geologists confirmed the truth. Vast aquifers exist, locked between impermeable rock layers, immune to drought, immune to rainfall. A miracle, some said. A trap. President Ibrahim Traoré warned. Standing before Parliament, he delivered the message plainly. Do not spend your ancestors' fortune without leaving a single coin for your children. It was not poetry. It was strategy. Fossil water, unlike rain, does not return once drained. Drink it all today, and it is gone forever. To guard this inheritance. Traore. Issu de decree 2304. It capped extraction volumes and tied every litre to sustainability offsets. Villages tapping fossil reserves must also invest in catchment basins. Solar desalination, or reforestation. The principle was balance. Water for life today, investment for life tomorrow. This approach divided opinion. Critics in Geneva called it overregulation. Some local chiefs complained of red tape, but supporters called it environmental statesmanship in a region where desperation can devour resources overnight. Traore was forcing the nation to think a century ahead. Fossil water, it declared, is not a product, it is a legacy. He went further. He classified fossil water as a strategic non-renewable asset, placing it legally beside Burkina Faso's gold and uranium. Unauthorized drilling now carries the same penalties as illegal mining. Seizure of equipment, prosecution, and reparations. With one stroke of law, water joined the ranks of minerals guarded like treasure. The implications shook both allies and rivals. International companies had long eyed the aquifers as opportunities for bottled water empires. Aid agencies proposed tapping them for refugee camps, but Decree 2304b slammed the door. These reserves were no longer a commons to exploit. They were the guarded vault of a nation. And yet, temptation lingers. Droughts intensify. Mothers still walk for muddy sips. Donneurs d'anglefeu. Roads, hospitals, electricity, in exchange for access. The question echoes through villages and boardrooms alike. Why wait for tomorrow, when today is already on fire? Traore calls this the moral test of the century. Will Burkina Faso defend what cannot be replaced? Or will it follow the path of nations that sold their future by the barrel? His stance is unyielding. To him, protecting fossil water is not just policy, it is survival against a slow genocide written in dust. In Ouagadougou's universities, students study the aquifers as if they are scripture. They learn that beneath their feet runs a fortune measured not in dollars, but in drops. In the villages of Oudalan, elders tell children, "This is the blood of the earth. Do not spill it carelessly." Foreign media mock the idea of guarding invisible water like uranium. But to the Burkinab, who bury their dead after failed harvests, the symbolism is clear. Fossil water is not merely geology. It is memory, covenant, promise. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Latest news is not just about building pipelines or micro dams. It is about shaping an ethic that says Africa will not survive by consuming its children's inheritance. It will survive by protecting it, even if that means telling the thirsty to wait, even if that means telling the powerful no. And so, deep beneath the Sahel, the question remains sealed with the water itself. Will Burkina Faso drink away its future, or defend it like gold? In April 2025, the impossible became fact. Burkina Faso, a nation with no coastline, no Great Lakes, no mighty rivers, signed treaties with Guinea and Côte d'Ivoire to pull seawater from the Atlantic. Critics sneered. How can a desert nation drink the ocean? But President Ibrahim Traoré was unmoved. He saw what the rest of the world refused to admit. Without water, sovereignty is an illusion. The plan began with corridor blue pipelines stretching from San Pedro in Ivory Coast and Bokeh in Guinea, carrying raw seawater eastward. On Burkinab soil, new reverse osmosis plants rose like citadels, powered by solar grids, engineered with support from Indian and Algerian experts. Each plant transformed 100,000 gallons of salt water a day into fresh, mineral-balanced water. Not for export, not for profit, only for survival. But this was only the beginning. From the coast, the water flowed into a vast subterranean web. 1,200 kilometers of reinforced thermoplastic pipes were buried under clay and stone. They threaded through valleys, under roads, beneath villages. The system was invisible to satellites, shielded by national security law, guarded like uranium. The people called it the Invisible River, Its impact spread quickly. In Kodogo, hydroponic farms sprouted where dust once ruled. In Jibo, refugee camps received clean water for the first time in years. In Bobo Dioulasso, biomedical labs ran on cooling systems fed by recycled, desalinated water. Even the sovereign data center in Kudugu, hosting Burkina Faso's first national cloud, was cooled by this underground stream. For Villegas, it was nothing short of a miracle. "We thought the sea belonged to others," said a farmer in Jawa. "Now, the sea has come to us." In Leo, children filled their buckets from taps that no longer ran dry, laughing as if they had never known the taste of dust. Mothers in Dano spoke of cooking meals without rationing every drop. Yet, this was not only about relief, it was a statement. In July 2025, Traore stood before the nation and declared, "Some nations were born with rivers. We built ours beneath the sand for our children." For the next century, those words carried more than pride. They carried defiance. The world watched uneasily. The United Nations called the project ambitious. The World Bank fretted over debt. European analysts whispered about destabilization of water markets. Because make no mistake, water is a market. Futures contracts are traded in London and New York. Patents on filtration systems are guarded like gold. But Burkina Faso latest news was different. It was a grassroots water grid that no one could speculate on. No outsider could own. Still, the question linger, can a poor, landlocked nation sustain such a system against rising costs and external pressure? What happens when neighbors, watching Burkinab crops flourish, demand their share? Will those who profit from scarcity tolerate a nation that refuses to stay thirsty? In Ouagadougou, students recite the specs of the invisible river as if it were scripture. Kilometers of pipe, litres per seconde, megawatts of solar power. In mosques and markets, elders speak of it not as technology, but as proof that Africa need not wait for clouds or donors. In classrooms, children draw rivers on maps where none existed before, claiming a geography. Their ancestors were denied. Foreign journalists called it madness. Villagers call it deliverance. And perhaps, in time, history will call it prophecy. Because in a century where climate is currency, Burkina Faso has shown that sovereignty can be built beneath the sand. This is more than engineering. It is resistance. It is a refusal to let thirst dictate destiny. It is a challenge to the old script that Africa must beg, borrow, or wait. By building a river underground, Burkina Faso has written a new line in history, one that says even the desert can be bent to serve life. And so the invisible river flows silent, unseen, unyielding, proof that a people once dismissed as powerless can summon an ocean into their soil, and in doing so, remind the world that survival, when defended with courage, becomes freedom. Water was buried, not wasted, not forgotten, protected. What the world mocked as reckless, Burkina Faso now holds as proof that survival can be engineered into sovereignty. From micro dams catching rain in forgotten valleys, to fossil aquifers guarded like gold, to the invisible river pulsing beneath the sand, President Ibrahim Traoré has redrawn the map of what it means to be landlocked and black in a world that profits from thirst. This is not just infrastructure, it is a declaration. Every buried tank is a refusal to beg. Every valve sealed in silence is a warning to those who think Africa's lifeline must always run through their contracts, while others count barrels of oil. Burkina Faso is counting drops of independence. But the question now extends beyond its borders. If one of the poorest nations on earth can summon the sea into its soil, what excuse remains for the rest of us? When will we stop waiting for clouds? When will we stop accepting charity disguised as chains? Captain Ibrahim. Latest news is not just a story of a president. It is a mirror held up to the entire black world. It asks us whether we will keep surviving on borrowed water or build our own rivers beneath the dust. To our viewers, especially those whose ancestors marched, bled, and built a life in a land that rarely gave them rain. Do you see what this means? Do you see that Africa's fight is not just Africa's, it is ours? So let your voice be heard. Write in the comments, New Africa, Africa Rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa. Because dignity is not given, it is seized, drop by drop, basin by basin, until even the desert must bow. If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe, because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear.